Today, we are pleased to present the third installment of the Workforce Development Series sponsored by the Deaconess Foundation. The Deaconess Foundation helps people in need build careers that sustain them and their families. We are honored to have the President and CEO of the Deaconess Foundation, Bethia Burke, join us today. She is also an alum of our Leadership Cleveland program and a member of the CLC Board of Trustees. Please welcome Kathy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bethia Burke. I'm the president of the Deaconess Foundation, where, as Rachel said, our mission is to help people impacted by poverty build careers which sustain themselves and their families. As she also said, this is the third of our 4 speakers in the Way Forward Leader Lunch Break series, where our objective is to share with you the landscape of the Northeast Ohio labor market, the resources available to employers and to job seekers. And all of this is to ensure we have a strong workforce working and enabling our companies to grow. In the archives, you can see the first 2 leader lunch breaks who spoke in this series, Jacob Duritsky and Michelle Rose. But today, I'd like to introduce Bethia Burke, the president of the Fund for Our Economic Future. She's going to tell you more about the Fund for Our Economic Future and their work specific to workforce, the work that she and her team are doing in terms of building pilots for employers to help with recruiting, hiring, and retention. But about Bethia. She grew up here in Greater Cleveland and received a BA in English from our very own Case Western Reserve University. She taught English for a year in France and then went to our nation's capital, where she analyzed costs and risks associated with large defense programs at organizations like Northrop Grumman. While there, she also earned her master's degree in applied economics from Johns Hopkins University, and then returned back to Cleveland in 2010 when she joined the Fund for Our Economic Future. In those 13 years that she's been at the fund, she's had a variety of roles of increasing responsibility until being elected president in December of 2019. On a personal note, Bethia and her husband are raising 3 children. Thank you for joining us today, Bethia.
Thanks for having me. I am just going to take a second here. Thank you for that introduction, Kathy, to pull up my slides for today. So just give me 1 second. All right. So as Kathy said, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Fund for Economic Future first, and then talk about a specific effort we have underway that is very much in a development stage. And I would welcome your input, feedback, ways it could or you could imagine it working for you, really anything that's on your mind relative to what I elevate in this first 15 minutes. Before I jump in to the strengthening workplaces work that we're doing, I'll start the pretty brief, hopefully, overview of the fund. We've been around for 20 years. Some of you have worked with us before. So we've done a lot of things, but in big picture way, we are working on big issues to change the attitudes and behaviors to enable the region to reach its full economic potential. So that's our role in this big ecosystem of actors that works on the efforts around equitable economic growth. And we're doing that in service to this vision. We're working towards a growing regional economy with good jobs and rising incomes for all, regardless of race or place. And really central to our work is this idea that places with thriving economies have thriving equitable economies. You can't have growth without inclusion that is sustained in the long term. And we aim to elevate those 2 ideas as co-equal propositions. And as part of that, and we'll talk a little bit today, a big thread of our work is about connecting people to jobs in ways that benefit both the people in those jobs and those employers who are looking to retain, attract, advance high quality individuals. Some of you have heard of the fund. Some of you might have seen work of the fund and not really known it was us. So a couple of things to elevate that are products of the fund, and you might have seen over time. We put out this thing called the 2 Tomorrows about 5 years ago, elevating these issues of equitable growth. We ran something called the Paradox Prize, aiming to break the no car, no job, no car paradox that many people face that prevents them from getting to work. We did a 5,000 person survey a year ago, which is the baseline of what I'll talk about today, looking at what people want and need out of work and in today's work environment. And we supported the development of ESG to the Power of Place, which is a tool embedded in Team Neo's website that can help company making a location decision see things like access to talent, commute patterns of potential workers, the racial demographics of the community that they might locate in, things that are associated with factors beyond time, risk, and money that really matter to company decision-making. So we've done a lot of things over 20 years. These are some in more recent years that have been more public-facing that you might have seen and not necessarily known they were products of the fund. And if you haven't seen them, they're super cool. So I'd be happy to talk about them at any point. Today is not about those, though. When I say the Fund for Our Economic Future, we are a team, and I'll show you the staff, a staffed organization. We are also really all of our members. So Kathy introduced me. Kathy is a member of our board by virtue of the Deaconess Foundation's contributions to the fund. You also see the other funding members of the organization that serve as our resource base and also our thought partnership as we develop and advance these initiatives. In addition to our funding members, we have 8 invited civic members who round out the diversity of perspective of our board members. And all together, we are the Fund for Our Economic Future. And we are supported by the team you see on the screen. We've got 6 full-time staff members, as well as some long-term contractors that do the work of the organization in support of that membership base that you just saw. So today we're talking about this idea of strengthening workplaces. The root of it is workers have changed, and it's time that we support workplaces to keep up with that change. Some of that change is more recent. There was, as I assume all of you know, a global pandemic that really shifted the way that people connect with work. It likely changed the way you thought about yourself in work or your employees at work. In addition to that really recent economic shock, over the past 20 years, workplaces have changed. So we went from, I believe it is less than 1 in 7 people of color in jobs in Northeast Ohio to 1 in 5. And so we are shifting demographically in really positive ways. And the policies and priorities of workplaces need to shift in response if we are to retain, advance, and really attract people into our organizations. And I suspect that many of you who employ people have been really thinking creatively about those propositions over the last 3 years, especially as the labor market has been extraordinarily tight. We did, in order to support this work, and I'll tell you how we are aiming to support stronger workplaces, but first to give you a sense of some of the things that we've learned through this 5,000 person survey that we did. It was conducted last year by an organization called the Center for Marketing and Opinion Research. So 5,000 adults across Northeast Ohio were surveyed, and we learned a lot of stuff. A couple around increased retention was that people who reported having higher job satisfaction that increased the odds that they would be retained by 126%. So people liking their jobs is important. People with access to remote or hybrid work options that increased the odds that they would stay in their jobs by 42%. It's a pretty strong correlation. People who felt that they were appropriately paid increased their odds of staying by 21%. So pay matters. Other things matter too. We also, through this data, learned some things about people who reported that they were likely to quit last year. So people who reported that they were likely to quit were more likely to report that they were likely to quit if they felt that their work demands were interfering with home and life. So you can think of this as the flip side to the coin of flexibility. If they didn't have the flexibility to take care of things at home and in their life, that increased the odds that they would quit by 30%, or that they would consider quitting by 30%. We also saw a real uptick in both employers caring about the mental health of their employees and people reporting stress and concerns about mental health over the past couple of years. Increased stress increased the odds that somebody would consider quitting by 13%. We've housed this data on a dashboard that you can look at, strengtheningworkplaces.com. There's a variety of cuts you can do if you're interested in specific demographics of people who responded, how they were associated with factors that relate to work. Here is one set of that data. You can see these are the top 5 barriers to employment that people reported, and they vary by income group. So you can see that, for example, pay too low to support a family showed up as a barrier across income groups, which is pretty interesting. People feeling like they can't support themselves and their family, or the people they know who are trying to get jobs can't support themselves or their family based on what they're earning. And then other things varied by income group. So you can see that a criminal record was reported in the top 5 barriers for those who were earning $25,000 to $50,000 a year, or something like childcare was more likely to show up in higher income groups. So when we think about strengthening workplaces, it's also important to recognize that people are facing different barriers to work and therefore have different needs based on what a company might be paying. So what they're earning is directly related to what you, if you employ people, pay, and understanding how those barriers show up differently with different workers matters when we think about recruiting and advancing and retaining people. When we thought about this data and when we thought about the challenges we are hearing, both in people getting back into work, as well as the continued conversation about the tightness of the labor market and the adjustments that companies are thinking about making in response to that tightness, I think it's also important to highlight that even though people have been quitting a lot, in our survey data, they suggested that there's something that could be done. Half of them suggested there's something that could be done to stop them from quitting. Now, I will also say the thing that's not on the slide is there was not high confidence among those people who said there was something that could be done that their employers would do something. And so that is where we come in. We are thinking about how to bridge between the idea that something could be improved in workplaces to help people and therefore help businesses. When people leave their jobs, it costs everyone. And the idea that that's not really happening. It's not happening. It's happening in some companies. There are certainly some companies who have changed policies dramatically and don't have recruitment or retention issues. It's just not everyone across the board. And so here's what we're thinking about as the fund. And then this is where we're in the formation stages. So if, through this call or after this call, you have feedback or thoughts, we really genuinely welcome. But the idea is that we can support inspiring change for those companies and employers who have an interest in changing. There's a whole group of employers who have no interest in changing and think the world will just solve itself. That's cool. We're focused on the set of employers who would like to change and for whatever reason are struggling to bridge the divide between these systemic challenges that are pretty hard and the solutions that might be out there. So our entry point is the combination of these concepts you see on the slide, a People's Choice Award with the Amazon Try It, Love It program. So on the People's Choice Award side, we're structuring a program where we're imagining a voting engagement where companies can select solutions that could work for the barriers we see that work outside of Northeast Ohio's market or are here but at subscale. And really elevate those things that you see, that companies in our region see as having high potential. And we want to connect those solutions through the support from the fund. So we're imagining we might pay for these things, but connect these solutions to a subset of employers who are really willing to be these super users. So if you're familiar with Amazon's Try It, Love It program, there's a group of super users who gets to experiment, try something for free with the idea that they might buy it in the long term if they see that it's a product that's worth it. So we want to bring solutions to the market that that work in other places. And there are, when I say solutions, there are things that are out there in the world that, again, either aren't in our market or might be in our market at subscale, things that address challenges in accessing childcare or hiring people who are justice involved, people who have criminal records have a harder time getting work, or that solve for transportation problems, or that enable access to mental health solutions. There are things that are working in other places across the country. We might be able to bring a vendor to market to enable employers locally here to try that solution. That we want there to be engagement with our area companies. It really doesn't matter. I mean, other than that I employ 6 people and I might want something here for our local folks, it doesn't really matter what I think works. What matters or could work or could be attached to people's companies. What matters is that we are elevating a set of practices or solutions or ideas that really can connect with the workplaces across the region. And Honor Minds is especially those workplaces that might not have large scale HR departments that allow like the constant thinking about the kinds of benefits and possibilities that can connect with today's workers. So there's some kind of public vote engagement around this work, and then ideally that we're able through this process to find those employers who are change ready, who are interested in doing good things for the people that work for them, and are willing to try something with us in a subsidized and supported way to see if it works, and then ultimately if there are things that work, both that they're embedded in those workplaces long term. And also we are creating advocates for the kinds of solutions that will support and help our workforce. And it's going to be a wild success, and we'll tell you all about it in the future. But in between then and now, I'm happy to take questions about that work, ideas that you might have, or if there are other things that you know of the fund that you'd like to ask, I'm happy to talk about anything. So Rachel, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Great, Bethia, thank you so much. So love the idea of the outline that you've proposed. What's next? How do you begin to implement this?
So we're in the throes of it right now. So we've got a list of some 30 things that are being tried in other markets. Again, things that connect with making childcare more accessible and available. There is a systems provider that is in other outside of Ohio markets that maps childcare centers and is a platform through which employers can support contributing to subsidized childcare for their employees. So they manage that. Or there is a matching service, again, outside of market, that matches between justice-involved individuals and potential jobs. There's also a supportive service that supports companies who need to change their policies in order to hire such individuals. There's lots of reasons people can't get into jobs. There's a shared service model that is, if people are familiar with Employer Resource Network, there's that specific model, and there are others like it, where companies can share the support of one individual that their employees can go to understand access to benefits, to get career coaching help, to get mental health support for a variety of service offerings, where a smaller scale company might not be able to hire that person individually. They can buy a share of that person's time, enable access to that person for their employees, and that has been demonstrated to improve outcomes. So there are these things that exist in the world that it's hard to know about if somebody isn't actively soliciting you. And even if somebody is actively soliciting you, it might be, I get those emails every day that's like, hey, Bethia, does the Fund for Our Economic Future want to do some sort of software product upgrade? It's like, leave me alone. And so what we're doing on our end is sourcing those things, understanding what's in the market. Again, we've got a list of like Bashara Addison on my team is the person doing the work. She's got a list of like 30 things, and then we're vetting them. We're calling to find out which employers are actually using them. What are the outcomes? Does it generate a strong return for the business? What does that return look like? How much does it cost? How much does it cost in the near term? How much does it cost in the long term? All those due diligence questions, so that when we elevate potential solutions in this market, we have strong confidence that they can work. whatever work means, right? That they can bridge the divide between the systemic challenge and the specific need of a company who's trying to hire, retain, or advance an individual in their workforce. So that's what we're doing right now. And then what you'll see 3 to 6 months from now, depending on how we roll out the voting, is a way for companies to then connect in with that. So we're going to do all this work on the vetting side, and then what we want is to market test. Imagine the Fund for Our Economic Future says, and I'm not committing to this, my board has to commit to this, but imagine the fund says, we will put out $150,000 for local employers to subscribe to one of these 3 service offerings, so that we're buying down the cost of that initial participation. And what we're asking of those employers who want to subscribe is that they're willing to try something that they might not have tried before. So trying to bridge that divide between the cost, the genuine cost of trying to implement a new benefit, and the time between that cost and when you might see a return in, say, increased retention and therefore lower cost of turnover and those things that matter to long-term profitability.
So as you think about needing the employer buy-in, what are potential barriers to getting that buy-in, and how are you thinking about being able to move over those barriers?
Yeah. So I would love to know if there are things that, elevate in people's on this call's mind, either now or in the future. But some things on my mind include really thinking about how difficult it is to take away a benefit once it's offered. So we're asking companies right through this work to offer something that might, say, bridge a childcare need. But if they offer something and then take it away in the future, even if it only helped one person, you can't take something back, right? Or you can, but it's going to make that people really upset. So trying to think about the way that we implement this so that there really is a way to try it before you buy it and not have to pre-sign up to buying it. Now, again, we're looking to elevate things. One of the ways we're trying to problem solve around that, to your question, is by really elevating things that have a proven track record just outside of market or at subscale here. But we recognize that that's a risk, and so we're trying to figure that out and broker that. The other is that we've been really wrestling with is there's a lot to digest at once. So labor force is tight. Things are preventing people from connecting to work. Those things are wide and varied, but really are differentiated depending on who you're trying to reach. They show up as childcare, transportation, justice, and then there's solutions around it. Trying to bridge that communication barrier and help connect in a simple way between the idea that change is possible and the support for the change that can happen.
What employment sectors or employers are successfully addressing the barriers, implementing these solutions? What seems to be working best for them so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that works the best is companies that have a way of asking their current workers what they want and need out of work. We, in addition to the 5,000 working age adult survey that I referenced, there was a companion piece of work run by Team Neo there was a survey and follow-on roundtables with some 700 companies throughout the region. Those who self-selected in were ones who were having talent shortages. So it wasn't a statistically valid representation of all companies. It was of those who self-selected in who were having talent shortages. And of those, 8% said that they had a way of asking their employees what they wanted and needed out of work. So we were in a period where people were quitting at record rates. Sourcing was extraordinarily hard. And the companies who were having that pressure and stress did not have a way of understanding what might help workers stay. Most important thing that can happen, and those employers who were having, in our experience, the strongest success in figuring out how to get the right set of benefits aligned with their employees are those who understand the people that work for them. And then beyond that, I think are those who, in addition to understanding, it's not really sector specific, Rachel, to your question, but it's those who want to use that understanding to make a change. I wish I could be on this call and tell you that when we heard from these 700 employers who were having talent shortages, that the response was help me, whoever they're talking to, understand how to make changes to improve. There were absolutely employers who responded whose attitude was, people don't know what they want, and they're going to come around, and we're going to keep doing things exactly the same way that we've been doing them, and we're going to everyone's just eventually going to come back to work. The shifting demographics of people and the realities of changing workplaces put me in a position where I just don't believe that that's a winning attitude. And so to your question, I think those who are having the most success are those who are taking in the new information and figuring out how they respond to it, even if that response might be different company by company.
You mentioned before the various types of solutions that are out there. And as you look at all of those, how many of them really address the barriers people have, such as the childcare, transportation, and how many are more which change how an employer itself might act through its HR policies? And do you see, as people are implementing those, it's one or the other, or trying to have multiple solutions?
Yeah, I think there's a variety of entry points. I think that there are absolutely strong outcomes associated with employers thinking about their own HR policies. That is harder to think about how to support change at scale. So I think it's really important. And for example, in the Paradox Prize work I mentioned, one of the solutions that we supported was Metro Health thinking about its transportation policies and benefits. And in over the period of time, that institution adopted new practices that really affected in a positive way the ability for people to get to work through things like free transportation passes and also daily parking rates, things that prevented people from figuring out new ways of getting around before. Super important, large-scale employer, affected a lot of people, great. That is harder to, like my mental model of imagining how we support that at scale is harder, other than to like talk about it in forums like this and hopefully inspire people to go home and think about it right from their own HR perspective. When we think about this initiative, the things that feel like they're elevating on our end, I'm happy to be challenged on this, feel like they're elevating on our end are things that sort of broker a service in. Whether that's that ERN model I mentioned, where employers can buy into a shared service, it both sort of externalizes the challenge, so an employer doesn't have to generate a whole new HR department where they might not have one, and allows for expansion and growth over time in a different kind of way.
So when you think about the issues that you see, broader issues like education, quality of life, how do those impact decisions folks make about workforce, and how does that impact the solutions that we need to implement?
Yeah, I think that I hope this addresses the question, Rachel, but I think the way that we're thinking about it is solutions may and hopefully will improve outcomes for a broad range of people, and we have a lot of data that we can disaggregate and understand what matters to different subsections of the population. And we at the fund are really interested in questions around what supports women, people of color, and Generation Z in better workplace outcomes because those are the three groups who lost the most earnings during the pandemic, and because over time we know that people have been disenfranchised in different ways from work. So ideally, right, like if we look at solutions that can support those populations, that ultimately supports a broader, expanded pool of people, and starting from that entry point helps us think about those issues that are most prevalent in some demographics.
We have time for one last question. How can those of us on the call support the work that you are doing through the fund?
I love this question. You can let me know that you're interested, and I can help you navigate it. But in particular ways, like if you see this initiative come out and you're looking for a path in to engage, hopefully that will be apparent. And also feel free to contact me or anybody on the team for how to connect. But we're always looking for partners who help us think about and implement the ideas that come up.